What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to continue talking about the latest in the world of iOS, including iOS 16.4 and the final release coming next week. Now, along with that, we're going to discuss the latest iPhone 15 leaks, why Apple is investing in movie theaters, a couple of insane stories about the AirTags, and much more. And as always, if you want to stay updated with all things Apple, make sure to click that subscribe button down below so you don't miss next week's episode. All right, so let's start by talking about iOS 16.4. So this past week, we did receive the RC or release candidate build, which indicates we should see that final release next week. Now, included in this RC, we did receive a few updates and bug fixes that we didn't know about until this came out. And the first one I want to talk about is the voice isolation feature on phone calls. So as you can see right here, I was testing this out in a phone call. Now keep in mind, voice isolation has always been there since like iOS 15 for FaceTime and other VoIP calls, but not for cellular regular calls. So I did test this. I called multiple people and went from standard to voice isolation and back and asked them how I sounded and which one sounded better. And everybody said that I sounded better on voice isolation. So that is a good sign. And I'm really glad to see this finally come to phone calls. And, I think it actually sounds like FaceTime audio now when you're on a cellular call, which we've just never had before. So this is a great new feature. And also it does stay on. So whatever you left it at last, it stays that way for the next phone call, which is nice. You never have to go in here and manually turn this on again. And then I did also want to talk about the home architecture upgrade because a few people are confused about this. So you're not going to see the home architecture upgrade if you already did it in 16.2 before Apple pulled it, before Apple removed it. So if you already did the home architecture upgrade, months ago when 16.2 released, you're not going to see any type of upgrade here in 16.4. However, you might notice some performance improvements because I know myself, I've actually noticed that my HomePods are no longer saying not responding or, no response anymore. So this one I actually unplugged and I plugged it back in. I just kept trying it to see if it would actually show the proper, status of it, and it did. So for some reason, I don't really know what changed, but the home application actually seems usable now for the first time in months. But if you are still having issues, even here on the RC build, make sure to go into your settings and check for software updates and make sure you update your HomePods to 16.4. And that's probably a big reason why all of mine are performing better now is because they're all on 16.4. Another big change coming in iOS 16.4, which I've talked about a lot now, is notifications for web apps. And I do have a web app right here. I'm going to send a notification to myself and you can see that is from a web application. And I did want to note that the notifications act just as regular notifications, including if you were to turn on a focus mode to not allow certain, applications, these will follow those rules. So they act just as regular notifications on your phone. I also wanted to mention that the app icons for these websites that I added to my home screen look much better than they did on previous versions. So they actually show like a high-res version of the favicon for the website and not just like a screenshot of the front page. Also, your iCloud shared library now has the duplicates folder down here. So you can see I'm in the shared library and I have 2 duplicates. However, when I click on it, you can see it says duplicates not available and it says it's not available when viewing from the shared library. So it has to be when you have them both enabled. So when you go to both libraries, that's where you can see the duplicates. For some reason, it doesn't work just in the iCloud shared library. This update also includes further optimizations to the crash detection feature on the iPhone 14 and the newer Apple Watches. So that's great. I am going to a theme park soon, so I am going to see if, I'm hoping that my phone doesn't call 911 while I'm on that roller coaster. So we'll see, but it should be a little bit better now than it was previously. I did also want to mention that I've been loving the focus filter for always on. So if you go into your recording a video focus, for example, right here, you can see I do have my always on display set to turn off. That way when I'm in, this focus mode, I don't want my always on display to be enabled. So it's nice to have that. I've really been loving that. I use that every single day now and it makes a difference. I don't find myself getting as distracted as I did before this was a feature. So in the code of iOS 16.4 RC were references to a new set of AirPods. And now Ming-Chi Kuo has said this on Twitter. I think this is likely the USB-C version of the AirPods Pro 2 with mass shipments expected in Q2 to Q3 of of this year. By the way, Apple currently appears to have no plans for USB-C versions of the AirPods 2 and 3. So it looks like Apple is going to be doing kind of the same thing they've done with previous AirPods, where they just have like a mid-cycle refresh instead of just a whole new pair of AirPods like the cheaper AirPods Lite. But what's interesting here is why would these be referenced in the code for 16.4 if they're not expected until Q2 or Q3? You would think they'd be like an iOS 17 or the final version of iOS 16. Regardless, expect these new AirPods Pro 2 with a USB-C charging case to come relatively soon, and it will also be interesting to see if Apple sells this charging case separately, because last time they did this with the wireless charging case, it was not sold separately. It was just sold as a new set of AirPods. So we'll have to wait and see what Apple does in terms of offering this to others who already have the AirPods Pro 2. And then I did also want to mention that Apple Pay Later or the Apple Savings account are still not here in 16.4, even on this RC build. So Apple laid the framework, it's in the code that both of these are ready. Apple Pay Later and Apple Savings account are in the code of 16.4, but for whatever reason, we still do not have them here, and that wasn't in the release notes or anything. So there's a chance that we get it pushed out, when 16.4 releases to the public via like a server-side push, but at this point, it's looking like we may have to wait until later for Apple Pay Later and the Apple Savings accounts. Now, as far as bugs go, I have been having this bug a lot on this RC build of 16.4. So I would say every like 3 or 4 times I go into the music application, I get hit with this "you're offline, turn off airplane mode or connect to Wi-Fi," even though I'm clearly connected to Wi-Fi. It's even happened when I'm on LTE on my main device. So there seems to be an issue with music here in 16.4. There were a lot of changes, so I'm not surprised, but this one is pretty annoying, and I found that the only way to fix this is to go into airplane mode and out of airplane mode. And there was also another bug in the music application where some people would see other people's playlists in their playlist view. So, just random playlists would appear in your own library. So I haven't had that happen. I was hoping I would, because that would be kind of funny, but some users were reporting that. And then as far as the performance and battery life goes, I have to say that, after using this on my main device since it was released, I think performance and battery life have improved here over 16.3 and 16.3.1. So that's great. I've also noticed that these squared off edges on the notifications, like when you swipe down, sometimes they show up as square and then they go back to being rounded. That seems to be fixed on my main device. So I never had it on my 14 Pro Max, but I did have it on my 14 Pro, and I've not been able to, recreate that on the RC build of 16.4. So that is a good sign. And then battery life, like I mentioned, I do seem to be getting about 45 minutes of additional on-screen time on a per charge basis here on 16.4 compared to 16.3.1 on my main device, my 14 Pro over here. So we'll see if that continues. I will keep you guys updated on that as well. I did also want to touch on some more iOS related news, not necessarily 16.4, but first, let's quickly talk about 16.4 and that final release. So as I mentioned before, we should see that right there on Monday the 27th or the 28th. So usually Apple pushes out these public releases on Mondays, but there's a lot of stuff happening on the 28th. Apple Music Classical, there's like Sonos integration, multiple things are happening from Apple on the 28th. So it is also possible to see 16.4 on that day. And then we should see 16.5 beta 1 as early as the following day after 16.4 drops. And then like I mentioned, I do want to touch on some other iOS related news and kind of other tidbits before the main news section of this episode. So the first thing I want to talk about is the FTC. So they just proposed a new law for making subscriptions as easy to cancel as it was to sign up. And this is kind of referencing iOS, not just iOS, but that seems to be a main point they're hitting here. And they're wanting to implement a simple click to cancel to make it as easy as possible for users to cancel a subscription without jumping through hoops. This ruling is part of the negative option rule, which is used to combat deceptive practices relating to subscriptions and memberships. And, Apple has made it pretty easy over the years to cancel subscriptions. Like you just go into your settings, you go to your Apple ID, and then you have subscriptions right there, and you're able to see all your subscriptions very easily. But, it could be even easier if this does get pushed through. And I think it's a great thing to push through, not just for iOS, but other services. Sometimes they make it like impossible to cancel your subscription and make it as hard as possible. So this should help with that. Apple Pay just went live in South Korea this past week. So users so far are reporting great things about it, even though it's super long overdue and it's kind of a soft launch in South Korea, but it seems like people are enjoying that so far. So that's great great to see. Microsoft might be making its own Xbox App Store for the iPhone as early as next year, according to CEO Phil Spencer, who said that in an interview with the Financial Times. So this would be allowed on the iPhone as early as next year with iOS 17, of course, due to that EU law that makes side-loading applications and third-party app stores mandatory and possible on the iPhone. And speaking of gaming, the 8BitDo controllers are now finally officially supported on the iPhone, the iPad, the Mac, and the Apple TV. You just have to make sure that your controller and your Apple device is updated. Now, I know some of these controllers worked before, but now a lot more of them are supported, and eventually all of them will be supported. If you're in India, Apple is preparing to open their first retail store in Mumbai in April, and then in May, they're planning to open another Apple store in Delhi. I know I have a lot of you guys out there that live in India, so this is tremendous news for you guys. Now let's move on to the main news section of this episode. All right, so let's start with more iPhone 15 leaks surrounding the solid-state buttons that are going to be replacing the volume rockers and mute switch that we've always had on every iPhone on the side. So this time, Shrimp Apple Pro has revealed new iPhone 15 Pro renders that show these unified volume buttons and that new mute button. So these were taken from a TikTok video and give us some kind of more insight as to what we can expect with the 15 Pro series. Now, I really hope that Apple allows us to kind of remap that mute switch, like that button right there, like we can on the Apple Watch Ultra with the action button. I hope there's some way to press that to do a different action other than just muting, because otherwise I don't see why Apple would do that. It seems counterproductive, and it just seems like a change that nobody really wants. Like, I get it for the volume rockers, like converting those into just one long button with capacitive, touch buttons, but I don't understand it for the mute switch. I just feel like there's still more to come here, and Apple has more in store via software. And if you're not a big fan of this change, just don't get the Pro models, because the regular 15 and 15 Plus are apparently going to have the same volume rockers and mute switch that we have on the 14. So this is a big change no matter which way the dice rolls, and I think it's going to ruffle quite a few feathers when it gets released. Apple always finds themselves in the middle of controversy, and I can already see this being the next big one. And then let's move on to Apple's big plans to move into movie theaters in the not so distant future. According to Bloomberg, Apple is increasing its budget to $1 billion a year for Apple TV Plus movies, and this includes releasing them in theaters all over the globe. Apple has approached movie studios about partnering to release a few titles in theaters this year and a slate of more films in the future. The list of potential releases includes Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, the spy thriller Argylle, and the film Napoleon. Apple has pledged to put movies in thousands of theaters for at least a month. So this is very interesting, and it kind of puts Apple directly up against Netflix and Amazon, which Netflix, of course, is the biggest player in having exclusive titles playing in theaters. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple does this. They've done it before with Apple TV Plus, I'm pretty sure, but just not on a global scale, and they haven't, devoted so much money to it. So that's kind of their new initiative that they're planning for this year and maybe even the future. Now, let me take you back a few years. Remember in 2020 when COVID happened and everybody was working from home, and we kind of just thought that was going to be the new norm, is working from home? Well, as you've seen over the past year, that's just simply not the case. And most companies want employees to work together in person. And now Apple is cracking down even more on those who are working from home. According to platformers Zoe Schiffer, Apple is tracking the attendance of its employees at offices using badge records to ensure they're coming in at least 3 times a week. In the tweet, she also says that some organizations are saying failure to comply could result in termination, but that doesn't appear to be a company-wide policy. And for some reason, people are upset at Apple for this, and I don't really understand it. If it's company policy, I don't really see why it's a big deal if they're tracking your badge, scans to make sure you're going in 3 times a week. I know that some companies reported that, working from home leads to better performance. Companies are performing better now that everybody's working from home. But last I saw, that was only in like 2020, 2021. I haven't really seen anything recent, because back then there was really nothing else to do. So of course everybody's going to be productive when there's nothing else to do. You can't go outside. So I'd like to see those numbers nowadays in like late 2022, early 2023 to see how it compares to 2020. I don't know. I just feel like the stay-at-home model is just not sustainable. Like fully stay at home is just not sustainable in general. So I like the hybrid, where you have to go in 3 days or maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and then you can work from home the other days. I don't know. What do you guys think about this? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. And then, are you a Steve Jobs super fan? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, do you have a lot of money sitting around? And I ask this because there is an extremely rare autographed award up for sale right now. This is a 10-year award plaque that was presented by Apple to a former marketing exec in 2000. And on an included note on this reward, Steve Jobs hand-signed it at the bottom, which is an extreme rarity as he does not sign many things in general. And, if it is signed, it's probably just one of those ones where it's not his real signature. This is his real signature. But unfortunately, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for it because TMZ reports that the going price is $95,000. So that's a lot of money, but if you are a collector, especially like an Apple collector, and you just have a lot of money, hey, this could be a cool piece to add to the collection. All right, so it's been a while since we talked about AirTags. I miss where we always had like funny, crazy stories about AirTags here on Apple Weekly. But I have good news for you guys. We have 2 stories today regarding AirTags. I know you guys always like these as well. So the first one was about a carjacker in Chicago who was arrested for, number 1, attempting to steal a manual Audi A3, but failing because he didn't know how to drive a stick shift. And number 2, because, well, he kept the keys after the failed carjacking. And since they had an AirTag attached to them, the keys, he was tracked down by police and arrested. You gotta love it. And that's just another reason to have AirTags attached to pretty much anything you own that has any value. I mean, they're so cheap, you may as well throw an AirTag on there. Even if the person finds them, they may not. So it's worth putting it on there, especially in your car. Maybe not on your keychain, you could put it on there, but also put it in your car as well. It could save you. Now, this second story is even crazier because this comes from a new report from Forbes that's titled, "The DEA Quietly Turned Apple's AirTag into a Surveillance Tool." Here's the context. In May 2022, border agents intercepted 2 packages from Shanghai, China. Inside of one was a pill press, which is a machine used to compress powders into tablets, and in the other were some pill dyes. Believing that they were destined for an illegal narcotics manufacturer, the DEA was called in. They inspected the devices, but rather than cancel the shipment or pay a visit to the intended recipient, they tried something they'd never been known to try before. They hid an Apple AirTag inside the pill press so they could track its movements. So that is just wild and definitely not what Apple intended, for these AirTags to be used for when they first released them. Now, the report does also go on to say that it's unclear how successful the AirTag was in helping the DEA, but the intended recipient was charged by the state. So it could very well have worked. But this has to be the most bizarre case I've ever seen of an AirTag being used for tracking anything. This is just wild. And don't forget, if you're trying to do anything nefarious with your AirTag in the future, just know that you do get an alert on your phone if, the recipient sees an AirTag tracking them that's not tied to their account. So just beware that that is a real thing. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video as always. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Again, make sure to subscribe for the next Apple Weekly episode. You can check out all the other episodes right here, and I will see you guys in the next one.